What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back with another Four Corners video breaking down tonight's very minor, very tiny 3-game NBA slate, courtesy of Awesemo.com. Now, right now, make sure to like this video and leave a comment down below telling me who's your favorite play on tonight's slate. It's a short one, so you're going to have to choose wisely. But again, let's keep the conversation going in the comments. I'll pop in later as well, so like the video right now and leave a comment. Now, the first corner I want to hit on is a game with the Thunder visiting the Nuggets. This one has a 237.5 total, which represents an 8.1 point boost for Denver and a 1.3 point boost for Oklahoma City. And of course, this total is going to be the highest on tonight's slate. Russell Westbrook's been on quite the hot streak recently. He's at 10 games over 56.25 fantasy points, and 2 out of his last 3 games have been above 81.25 fantasy points. So the fact that he's going to be second highest owned on the slate at 39% means you're going to want to probably at least match that. Again, this is the highest total game. Westbrook on a heater. Really no reason to jump off the Westbrook train at this point unless you just want to differentiate your lineups. Paul George is going to be a lower owned option. He's coming off of his first dud game in a while, one in which his usage dropped off a little bit. I think I have a little bit of concern that Markieff Morris, even though they're not usually playing in the same shifts, could take a little bit of usage away on the wing. But overall, I think Paul George is like a fine play. And the fact that, again, he's coming off his first bad game in a while, going to be a little bit lower owned, could give you some equity if you can get to him, given how high priced both he and Russell Westbrook are. Steven Adams had 53.5 fantasy points in his last game versus Denver, and while I don't necessarily see that exact performance happening again, I think he's a pretty strong value play with where his price is. Dennis Schroeder as well, pretty cheap. Not a lot of upside because, again, he's not getting a ton of minutes, and Dennis Schroeder really hasn't shown a ton of upside this year, except when Russell Westbrook has been out. So overall, both Adams and Schroeder look like decent priced guys, can have a little bit of upside because this is a very high scoring game expected by Vegas. Jeremy Grant and Markieff Morris as well. Also a little bit interesting, though. Those guys are competing for minutes with each other. I think there's some risk there. But again, this is a high total game, and it's a 3-game slate, so you got to look at everybody. And I think those two are worth just calling out briefly, but not worth including on the PowerPoint slide, apparently. Nikola Jokic is expected to be the highest owned player on the slate at 41%, and I really don't have any issue with that. Jokic had one really good game versus the Thunder this year and one really bad game. That's pretty much what his history is. He's either doing really well or doing really poorly, so I think I would match the field on Jokic, not go too much above it, not go too much underneath it, because I think he's either going to have that big day or he's not. You're going to want to have a lineup builds that kind of show you both sides of that, where if you have Jokic in, he has that great 70-point day, fantastic. If he has a bad day, you have 50% of your lineups that don't have him in. I think that's the way to go about it. Paul Millsap has had 3 games in a row over 45.75 fantasy points, and the rebounding upside is really what's driving his value here. In his last 3 games, he's been over 13 rebounds, and throughout the course of the year, he's had just 6 double-digit rebound games in the entire season leading up to this last run here that he's on. So overall, I think his returns to injury might be good. I think they could be using him in a different way. There was some foul trouble for Jokic last game, which is always going to help out Paul Millsap's fantasy production. But overall, I think Millsap looks pretty good here. I like what I'm seeing from him. I think the rebounding shows a little bit of rejuvenation as well. So I'm comfortable with Paul Millsap today, and I think he'd be my second favorite Nugget behind Jokic. And a Nugget not far behind these guys, but still pretty decently behind, be Jamal Murray. I think he looks like a pretty strong play. His price is reasonable. I have him a little bit behind Millsap in terms of projections, but overall I think he looks good. Some risk for the backcourt minutes. Again, that backcourt's getting very jammed up with bodies, but Jamal Murray seems like he's going to be the guy who gets the most usage moving forward. So I'm cool with Jamal Murray, just not a guy I'd want to trust at particularly high volume. And despite this big total, everything else in the Nuggets seems kind of iffy to me. Again, there's just a lot of bodies in the rotation, and I think there are some guys here who could get enough minutes to be useful, some guys who may not, but overall there's going to be just so many guys competing for those minutes where it's hard to trust anybody. The guys I like the most, I'd say, would be Will Barton, Isaiah Thomas, and Malik Beasley. I think just because, again, it's going to be a big scoring game, those guys do have GPP scoring upside where they could get the ball, start seeing the shots fall a little bit more, a little more frequency. So overall, I think those guys are okay. Mason Plumlee a little bit further behind, but I think an interesting play if you aren't playing Jokic. Maybe Jokic gets in some foul trouble. We see Plumlee pick up some minutes. But overall, I think those 3 guys on the wing and in the backcourt would be the ones that I feel the most comfortable with. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Magic and the Knicks, and this one has a lowest on the slate, 215.5 total, but it does represent a 5.3 point boost for Orlando. Nikola Vucevic could have an even easier time than he would have had otherwise versus the Knicks because DeAndre Jordan is currently doubtful with a leg injury. So Nikola Vucevic looks about as good as you can get. I think it's an interesting pivot to Jokic in those lineups, which we talked about, which we're not playing Jokic because, again, boomer bust there. Nikola Vucevic, not as boomer bust. He should have a good day here. How good of a day, it all depends, but he's just looked fine. I think he's going to get you in the 50 fantasy point range, and that could be enough to win you a tournament if the other centers falter. Evan Fournier and Aaron Gordon have mostly been points-dependent guys recently, and they could have a little bit more peripheral upside versus the Knicks team who's going to turn the ball over, going to miss some shots, so some rebounding, some steals that could be out there for these guys, maybe some blocks for Aaron Gordon, probably not so much for Evan Fournier. So I think those guys are fine. You're still looking mostly for points, though, so I wouldn't want to play both guys necessarily, but I don't really have a problem with it, I guess, if that's how it works out. But overall, I think Fournier and Gordon, pretty comparable plays who look fine. Not guys I'm going out of my way to get in lineups, but guys who do make sense to have some exposure to. DJ Augustin is also a cheap play who is going to open up some value for you if you have him in your roster. I think there's some risk. Again, he's another boomer bust guy, but this Knicks team is allowing pretty generous field goal percentages, also allowing a ton of assists, which tends to happen when the teams allows pretty high field goal percentages. So overall, DJ Augustin looks pretty strong to me. Not a guy, again, who I expect to have a crazy high ceiling here, but if the Knicks keep this one close, if he gets enough run, they could have a decent day, and that value could open up enough ways for you to maybe jam in a Westbrook and Paul George, or maybe Westbrook and Jokic, however you want to approach that. His salary is low enough where he could open up ways for you to get to those other high-priced guys. And I can't have the Magic in a Four Corners video without mentioning my boy Terrence Ross. Terrence Ross always in play, and I think we just saw that over the weekend versus Toronto. He put up 41.25 fantasy points as he shot 21 times there. I know that was a revenge game. That is sort of what Terrence Ross is. He's going to either shoot a bunch of shots and they're going to fall, or he's going to shoot a slightly lesser bunch of shots, and then some of them are going to miss and some of them are going to fall. But overall, he's a guy who's going to be in the mix every single time, and I think he's going to go lower owned than expected because you really can't trust him. He's going to have those breakouts days because he's just a points guy. But Terrence Ross, always worth consideration, especially on a 3-game slate like this one. The Knicks side's been a mess, but it seems like the rotations are maybe stabilizing. Of course, as I say that, I'm sure it'll turn completely sideways in ways which you couldn't even expect today. But Damian Dodson's been over 16 shots in 3 out of his last 4 games. He's also been around the mid-30s minutes in his last 2. So overall, I think Damian Dodson looks like the guy I'm willing to trust the most here. Very cheap price. And I've compared him before on the Live Before Lock show to being a better Tim Hardaway, and I think that might be a bit presumptuous and was a bit of an exaggeration. We do hyperbole sometimes on these shows. But I think Damian Dodson's a strong player, and as long as he's getting shots, I like him. And I think he's going to get shots here. So I'm comfortable with him, probably just with where the field is, which I think will be in the mid-20s percentages of ownership. Now, assuming DeAndre Jordan is ruled out as it currently looks like, Mitchell Robinson looks like a strong play again. His first start for DeAndre Jordan, he had a monster day versus the Spurs, which is a tougher matchup than this Magic one, I think. Though, honestly, with the way the Magic have defending recently, I think it's probably closer than it may seem. But still, Mitchell Robinson, 45 fantasy points in 32 minutes, and the 32 minutes are really what I care about there. There's always some foul trouble risk for Mitch. He does go after shots pretty aggressively, and that's why he gets great block totals. But I like Mitchell Robinson here. I think he's a strong play. I'll definitely have a bunch of him in my lineups today because I just like what he does on the court, and I think there are some risks, but hey, it's probably worth it because it's a 3-game slate, and he does have crazy upside that he just showed. Also, Kevin Knox getting a little bit more of appeal because of DeAndre Jordan being out. He's been rebounding a little bit more effectively. I'm fine with Kevin Knox. He's been a points-dependent guy, so if you add some rebounding to the mix, I think that increases his upside in a bit of a noteworthy way. So Kevin Knox looks decent to me, just probably not as good because, again, his minutes can get a little weird too. Dennis Smith is coming off of his first day over 50 fantasy points for the New York Knicks, and he looked good in that game versus the Spurs. His price is up enough where it seems like he's not going to have a ton of ownership, just around 10% expected by us right now at Osmo.com. So Dennis Smith looks good to me. I think he's an interesting contrarian play to have in the mix. Not a guy you can trust. He's got Emmanuel Mudiay breathing down his neck for minutes. Lonzo Trier, who's also not a bad pump play today, breathing down his neck as well. So there is some risk for Smith, but he seems like he's getting high 20s, about 30 minutes a game. That's where you want him to be to have that upside. So Dennis Smith is an okay play. Just I'm not sure how much I'll have of him because his price is kind of weird. It doesn't take a ton of ownership to get above the field on him, with, again, that just 10% ownership expected for him. Last corner I'm going to hit on today, and it may shock you because, again, there's only 3 games, so I'm really out of options here. But this one with the Celtics and the Raptors. This one is a 226.5 combined total, which is a slight increase on the Raptors season average and a slight decrease for the Celtics. The first guy I'd want to look at here is Kyrie Irving. He's had a couple of monster games versus Toronto this year. 71.5 fantasy points and 63.75 fantasy points in his last 2 versus the Raptors. Defensively, obviously, the Raptors are a good team. Kyrie Irving on a whole other level as a scorer. So I think as you see the other Celtics get clamped down defensively, you could see Kyrie continue to push that usage up. So I'm comfortable with Kyrie here. Again, it's going to be a lot of people going to Westbrook, a lot of people going elsewhere. Kyrie going to be around 30% ownership according to our projections right now. So I like Kyrie. I think having some exposure makes sense. Al Horford is projected for similar ownership to Kyrie, but he's actually coming off of a pretty down game versus Chicago. He had just 2 rebounds there, which is a bit of a surprise given that he had 31 in the 2 games before that for the Celtics. So Al Horford looks okay here. I think this is a spot for him to get back on track, and he's certainly going to be needed to have some more rebounds, some more assists, as well as some scoring. So I think Al Horford's a good play. I definitely prefer Kyrie if we're going to talk about the Celtics who are comparably owned. But overall, Al Horford definitely worth having some exposure to, and still at a reasonable price where he does have some upside there. Now, assuming no value opens up on the slate, no injuries that are going to bump anybody up in the rotation for any of these games, Marcus Smart and Marcus Morris look like decent value plays. I don't think they have a ton of upside necessarily, but they're cheap guys in the 4K range on DraftKings who can maybe open up some other spots. So guys like them, guys like DJ Augustin, you're probably going to have to take a little more risk on with those guys because maybe not even risk, just a lower ceiling on with those guys, because that's how you're going to be able to afford some of the other guys who are going to have the higher ceilings in tonight's slate. And Gordon Hayward's another guy who fits that criteria as well, as a cheap guy. And he's had 2 games over 32.5 fantasy points versus Toronto this year. No real logical reason why that is. One of the games he picked up a start, so obviously that's going to help. But Gordon Hayward looks good. I don't know that I would trust him at super high volumes, but I think his success versus Toronto, I think there's a reason for it. His ball handling ability makes him more of a diverse attacker than some of the other guys in the Celtics rotation. So Hayward looks okay, just not a guy who I'm trying to go out of my way for. Kawhi Leonard rested last game for the Raptors, and that's going to help him out a little bit here. He's brought it so far in matchups with the Celtics this year. So I think he looks like a strong play. He's never really going to get you that high of a ceiling. I think that's really the issue with Kawhi, with where his price is, especially on a slate like this where we have other guys who we know should have a much higher ceiling. But I think Kawhi is a fine play, especially if you're running it back with Kyrie and some other Celtics. Marc Gasol picked up the start for Serge Ibaka last game for the Raptors, and that should continue here, one would assume. He hasn't done a lot for Toronto yet, but with where his price is and some of the success he's had in the past, I think he's a perfectly okay guy to put in the mix today. I would have some exposure to him. I think I'll probably just match the field on him, because he's not a guy who I really am dying to have, and he just, again, hasn't shown anything on Toronto so far, but he could have that day. And on a 3-game slate, if he does have that day and you don't have him, you're going to be pretty bummed if he ends up in a tournament-winning lineup. Kyle Lowry is generally a better play when Kawhi Leonard is sitting, but I think we've seen some success recently for Kyle Lowry in games in which Kawhi is suited up. So I don't mind Kyle Lowry. It's a 3-game slate. Again, not a ton of options everywhere. So Kyle Lowry, okay to me. Again, not a guy I'm trying to get a lot of in there, but I don't know. My enthusiasm is waning. This Raptors side not really doing it for me overall. Speaking of guys who are really going to stoke my enthusiasm, Danny Green. He's a player. He's another guy in that 4K range who could have an okay enough day to open up value for other guys. So Danny Green, a person who is going to shoot the basketball some tonight and possibly be okay or possibly be mediocre. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on tonight's 3-game slate, and hopefully that was enough to get you guys through. We've had some good success with these videos over the last few days, so make sure to like the video right now and leave a comment down below. Tell me which player you're targeting the most right now. Again, it's a 3-game slate, so make your choices wisely. For me, it's probably going to be Russell Westbrook. I don't know if you caught that from the video, but leave your comment down below telling me who you're picking. I'll pop in later or throughout the day just to chop it up with you guys a little in the comments. And of course, use the promo code SWITCHANDHEDGE to get 50% off your first month at Osmo.com. Get all the ownership projections and rankings from Osmo, who is the top player in the world for good reason. Also get projections from Josh Engelman that you just put right into Fantasy Cruncher. So go do that now. Premium Slack as well, where people are participating, exchanging a lot of ideas and cross-chat throughout the day. So use that promo code SWITCHANDHEDGE, get in there. I'll be back on Live Before Lock tonight with Fast City Fear, so check that out on our YouTube channel. And I wish you guys the best of luck, and see you guys again tomorrow for another Four Corners video.